She hadn't spoken to him in 3 years, but when Isabella stepped out of that limousine with 4 identical faces that looked exactly like him, David Chen realized his birthday party was about to become a reckoning. But that moment was still 20 minutes away. David adjusted his Italian silk tie for the 3rd time, surveying the rooftop terrace of his Manhattan penthouse. 200 of the city's elite would arrive within the hour for his 40th birthday celebration. Crystal chandeliers hung from temporary structures, casting rainbow prisms across tables laden with exotic orchids and champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Welcome back, loves. I have to warn you, what you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a mirror. It's going to show you what real love looks like when it refuses to give up, even after years of pain. If you're ready to feel everything, the heartbreak, the hope, the moment when everything changes, hit subscribe and tell me where in the world you're listening from. Because tomorrow, I have a story that will make today's seem like a warm-up, and trust me, you're going to want to be here for it. Now, back to the story. Everything looks perfect, Mr. Chen. His assistant Maya said, clipboard in hand. The caterers are ready, the photographer is set up, and Kiandra should be here any minute. David's jaw tightened slightly at the mention of Kiandra, the stunning Jamaican model who'd been his companion for the past 2 years. The woman for whom he'd destroyed his marriage. The woman who made him feel alive in ways he'd forgotten were possible. Good, he muttered, straightening a place card. And the gift tables? Secured. The Rolex collection is locked in the safe, and the art pieces are properly displayed. David nodded absently, his mind drifting to the phone call he'd ignored earlier. His lawyer probably calling about the final divorce papers. 3 years of legal proceedings, and Isabella had never asked for more than what was fair. She'd been reasonable, dignified. Even when she'd caught him with Kiandra at the Four Seasons, she'd simply set down her keycard and walked away without a scene. He'd expected fights, screaming, tears. Instead, she'd given him silence that somehow felt worse than any confrontation. Don't think about her tonight, he told himself. Tonight is about moving forward. Meanwhile, across the city, Isabella Rodriguez Chen, she'd kept the hyphenated name for reasons she couldn't fully explain, knelt on the worn carpet of her Queens apartment, carefully braiding her daughter's hair. Maria fidgeted in her tiny black dress, the same one Isabella had found at the thrift store and carefully altered to fit. "Mommy, why do we have to look so fancy?" Maria asked, her voice carrying the slight lisp that made Isabella's heart ache with love. "Because today is important, Mija," Isabella whispered, securing the braid with a small pink ribbon. "Today we're going to see your papi." The other 3 children, Miguel, Sofia, and Carlos, sat quietly on the couch, their matching outfits making them look like small soldiers preparing for battle. At 3 years old, they didn't understand the magnitude of what was about to happen. They'd never met their father. Never even seen his picture. Isabella stood, smoothing her own dress, a simple black number she'd owned since before her marriage, altered to fit her post-pregnancy body. She'd lost most of the baby weight, but her hips remained wider, her breasts fuller. She looked like a woman who'd carried and birthed 4 children. She looked like someone who'd survived. "Are you sure about this, Izzy?" Her sister Carmen emerged from the kitchen, car keys in hand. "You don't have to do this. He made his choice." Isabella met her reflection in the cracked mirror by the door. 3 years of sleepless nights, of working 2 jobs, of raising 4 children alone, while their father lived in luxury with his model girlfriend. 3 years of silence, of dignity, of rebuilding herself from the ground up. "He made his choice," she repeated softly. "But they deserve to know their father, and he deserves to know what he gave up." She turned to her children, who looked up at her with David's dark eyes and her own stubborn chin. "Come on, Miss Amores, it's time." What do you think Isabella's real motivation is for showing up tonight? Is it about the children, or is there something deeper driving her decision? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The limousine Carmen had somehow managed to rent for the evening waited downstairs. Isabella had spent her savings on this moment. The dress, the car, the matching outfits for the children. Everything had to be perfect. Everything had to say what she couldn't put into words. As she buckled the last car seat, Maria tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, will Poppy like us?" Isabella's breath caught. She knelt down, cupping her daughter's face in her hands. "He's going to love you, baby. All of you, more than he ever imagined possible." "If only I believed it myself," she thought as the limousine pulled away from the curb, heading toward the life she'd once shared and the man who'd thrown it all away. The Manhattan skyline glittered ahead of them, full of promise and pain, as Isabella Rodriguez Chen prepared to crash her ex-husband's birthday party with the 4 greatest gifts he'd never known he'd received. The party was in full swing when the limousine pulled up to the building's entrance. David stood on his terrace, champagne flute in hand, watching the city lights twinkle below. The evening air carried the scent of expensive perfume and cigar smoke as his guests mingled around him. Mayor Thompson was deep in conversation with the tech mogul whose company David had just acquired. Keandra moved through the crowd like liquid gold, her stunning figure drawing appreciative glances in her emerald dress that cost more than most people's cars. "You look pensive for a birthday boy," she purred, sliding up beside him and placing a manicured hand on his chest. Her Jamaican accent made everything sound like music. "Just thinking," David replied. Not quite meeting her eyes, something felt off tonight. A restlessness he couldn't shake. "About what?" Before he could answer, his doorman's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Chen, there's a situation downstairs. A woman with children. She says she's your wife." The champagne flute slipped from David's fingers, shattering against the marble floor. The sound seemed to echo louder than it should have, causing nearby conversations to pause. "Ex-wife," he corrected automatically, his voice hoarse. "Tell her the party is private." "Sir, she says she's not leaving. And sir, there are 4 children with her. They look exactly like you." The blood drained from David's face. Keandra's hand fell away from his chest as if he'd suddenly become ice. "4 children?" Keandra's voice was barely a whisper. David's mind raced. 3 years ago, when he'd left Isabella for Keandra, she'd been different, glowing. He'd assumed it was just her way of coping with the divorce, but now, "Send them up," he said, his voice barely audible. "David, what's happening?" Keandra's accent had sharpened with concern. "I don't know." Meanwhile, in the elevator, Isabella held Carlos close to her chest while the other 3 children pressed against her sides. The elevator was mirrored, reflecting their small group into infinity. 4 children who looked like their father, and 1 woman who'd once been naive enough to believe in forever. "Mommy, I'm scared," Sophia whispered. "I know, baby. But sometimes we have to be brave even when we're scared." The elevator dinged softly, and the doors opened to reveal a corridor lined with expensive artwork. Isabella could hear the murmur of voices, the clink of glasses, the kind of sophisticated laughter she'd once been part of. She adjusted Maria's dress one final time, smoothed Miguel's hair, and took a deep breath. "Remember what we practiced. Stay close to Mommy and be polite." The terrace doors were glass, and through them, Isabella could see the party in full swing. Her eyes found David immediately. He stood frozen near the railing, his face pale with shock. Keandra stood beside him, her beauty stunning even from a distance. Isabella pushed open the doors. The effect was immediate and devastating. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Glasses paused halfway to lips. The string quartet faltered, their music dying into an awkward silence. Isabella stepped onto the terrace, her 4 children arranged around her like a protective wall. Maria held her hand while Miguel and Sofia flanked her sides. Carlos remained in her arms, his thumb in his mouth, dark eyes wide with wonder at all the lights and people. "Hello, David," Isabella said, her voice carrying across the silent terrace with crystal clarity. David stared at her, then at the children, then back at her. His mouth opened and closed without sound. Up close, there was no denying it. The children were undeniably his. They had his distinctive dark eyes, his strong jaw, his slightly stubborn chin. Maria even had the same small scar on her eyebrow that he'd gotten falling off his bike as a child. "Isabella," he finally managed, his voice cracking on her name. "What? How?" "Quadruplets," she said simply, shifting Carlos to her other arm. "Born 8 months after you left. This is Maria, Miguel, Sofia, and Carlos, your children." The words hit the crowd like a physical blow. Someone gasped. A champagne glass shattered somewhere in the distance. David's legs seemed to give out slightly, and he grabbed the railing for support. Kendra took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. "David, you never said." "I didn't know," he whispered, his eyes locked on Isabella's face. "I swear to God, I didn't know." Isabella's expression remained calm, but those who knew her well might have noticed the slight tremor in her hands, the way she held her children just a little too tightly. "I tried to tell you," she said quietly. "The night you came home with her lipstick on your collar, I had the ultrasound pictures in my purse. I was going to surprise you with dinner and—" She trailed off, the memory too painful to voice in front of this crowd. "But you had already made your choice." David's breathing was shallow, his face ashen. "Happy birthday, David," she interrupted, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "I thought it was time you met your children." Maria, brave despite her fear, stepped forward. "Are you our daddy?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, like a prayer, like the most important words ever spoken. David looked down at his daughter, and for the first time in 3 years, David Chen, millionaire businessman, had absolutely no idea what to say. How do you think David should respond to meeting his children for the first time? What would you say in this moment? Let us know in the comments. This is where everything changes. The silence stretched endlessly, broken only by the distant sound of the city below and the quiet breathing of 4 children who were about to learn whether their father would choose them or walk away again. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. David's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, his eyes darting between Isabella's composed face and the 4 small children who carried his features like living proof of his abandoned responsibilities. "This is," he started, then stopped, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "This is impossible. You would have told me. You would have." "Would I?" Isabella's voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath the silk. When you were moving your things out while I was at work, when you changed your phone number, when your lawyer told mine that you wanted a clean break with no complications." The crowd pressed closer, pretending to mingle while hanging on every word. David became suddenly, acutely aware of the 200 pairs of eyes witnessing his life implode in real time. Mayor Thompson stood frozen with a canapé halfway to his mouth. The tech mogul's wife had her phone out, no doubt already composing social media posts. "People are staring," David hissed, his businessman instincts kicking in even as his personal world crumbled. Isabella tilted her head slightly, the gesture so familiar it made his chest ache. "Are you embarrassed by them? By your children?" "No. I don't know what I mean." David's composure, legendary in boardrooms and negotiations, was completely shattered. "This is a lot to process, Isabella. You can't just show up after 3 years and expect what? Her voice rose slightly, the first crack in her armor. Expect you to acknowledge your children? Expect you to feel something other than inconvenience? Keandra stepped forward, her model training allowing her to glide gracefully even in crisis. Perhaps we should take this inside, she suggested, her accent thicker with stress. Away from the guests. Isabella's gaze shifted to the woman who had replaced her, taking in the flawless skin, the perfect figure, the youth that Isabella had never had time to mourn losing. And you are. Kendra Morrison. I'm David's girlfriend. Isabella finished, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. Yes, I know who you are. Hard to miss the tabloid photos. David flinched. During their marriage, Isabella had never been cruel, never been petty. Seeing her like this, controlled but cutting, reminded him of exactly what he'd lost. The children don't need to hear this, he said desperately, grasping for any foothold in the emotional avalanche. Whatever issues we have, they're innocent. They are innocent, Isabella agreed, her hand smoothing over Carlos's back as he remained pressed against her chest. They're also tired, hungry, and confused about why their father is acting like they're strangers. Maria, who had been watching the adults with her father's intelligent eyes, tugged on Isabella's dress. "Mommy, why is everyone being loud?" The question broke through the tension like a knife. Isabella immediately knelt down, bringing herself to Maria's eye level while somehow managing to keep the other 3 children close. "Sometimes grown-ups need to talk about important things, Mija," she said softly. "But you don't need to worry about it, okay?" David watched this interaction with growing awareness. Isabella moved with the practiced ease of someone who had been managing 4 children alone for 3 years. She knew exactly how to soothe Maria's fears while simultaneously redirecting Miguel's wandering attention and preventing Sophia from getting too close to the terrace edge. She was a mother. Not just a woman who had given birth, but a mother in every sense of the word, and he had missed all of it. "I need a drink," he muttered, turning away from the scene. "David," Isabella's voice stopped him. "They're not going anywhere, and neither am I." "What do you want from me, Isabella?" The words came out harsher than he intended, fueled by panic and shame. "Money? Is that what this is about? Because if you needed help, you could have—" "Don't." The word cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare reduce this to money." Several guests had abandoned any pretense of not listening. The mayor's wife was openly staring, and David could see phones being discreetly raised to record the spectacle. Then, what? David's voice was getting louder, his control slipping further. Isabella stood slowly, Carlos still in her arms, the other 3 children clustering around her like she was their entire world, which, David realized with a sinking heart, she was. "I want you to look at them," she said simply. "Really look at them. Maria has your stubborn streak. She refused to walk until she was 18 months old because she was determined to run first. Miguel loves numbers just like you do. He can already count to 50 in English and Spanish. Sophia hums when she's concentrating, the same way you used to when you were working late. And Carlos," she paused, her voice softening. "Carlos has your laugh. The real one, not the one you use for business meetings." With each word, David felt the walls he was trying to build crumble little more. These weren't just children, they were his children. His DNA, his mannerisms, his legacy walking around in tiny bodies that he'd never held, never kissed goodnight, never comforted during thunderstorms. "I can't do this," he whispered, backing away. "Not here, not like this." "Then where, David?" Isabella's composure finally cracked completely. "When? They're 3 years old. They've spent 3 years wondering why they don't have a daddy like other kids. How much longer should they wait for you to be ready?" Keandra placed a hand on David's arm. David, perhaps we should—" "No." David shook her off, his panic morphing into something uglier. "This is manipulation. This is emotional terrorism." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Isabella's face went completely white, and for a moment David thought she might actually slap him. Instead, she gathered her children closer and spoke in a voice so quiet it was barely audible above the city noise. "We'll be staying at the Marriott downtown. Room 1247. When you're ready to be their father instead of just their donor, you know where to find us." David just called Isabella's actions emotional terrorism. Do you think he's right? Or is he just scared? What would you do in Isabella's position? Share your thoughts below. She turned to leave, but Maria broke free from the group and ran to David, wrapping her small arms around his leg. "Daddy, don't be sad," she said, looking up at him with eyes that were exactly like his own. "Mommy says you just forgot about us for a little while, but now you remember." David stood frozen, this tiny person clinging to him with complete trust, while 200 of New York's elite watched his world realign itself around 4 children who had never stopped being his, even when he'd forgotten they existed. The weight of Maria's small arms around his leg felt heavier than any business deal, any decision, any responsibility he'd ever carried. And for the first time in 3 years, David Chen had absolutely no idea what to do next. Maria's innocent words, "Daddy, don't be sad," seemed to shatter something fundamental in the evening air. David stood paralyzed, feeling the weight of his daughter's small arms around his leg, acutely aware of every eye on the terrace boring into him. Then Sophia started crying. Not the theatrical wailing of a child seeking attention, but the quiet, heartbroken sobs of someone who sensed the adult world was collapsing around her. The overwhelming crowd, the tension between her parents, the strange environment, it all became too much for her 3-year-old mind to process. "Mommy," she whimpered, reaching up with desperate arms. "I want to go home." Isabella immediately moved to comfort her, but Carlos chose that moment to have his own breakdown. The thumb came out of his mouth, and he began crying in earnest, his wails echoing off the glass walls of the terrace. "Shh, mi amor," Isabella whispered, trying to soothe both children while keeping track of Maria still clinging to David and Miguel, who had begun wandering toward the champagne table with curious eyes. The party guests were no longer pretending to be polite. Phones were openly recording now. Someone's flash went off. The mayor's wife was already typing furiously on her phone, no doubt crafting tomorrow's gossip column headline. "Miguel, no!" Isabella called out as her son reached for a crystal glass. But she couldn't move, not with Carlos screaming in her arms and Sophia wrapped around her legs. For the first time since arriving, Isabella's perfect composure cracked completely. She looked exhausted, overwhelmed, and utterly alone despite being surrounded by people. David watched this scene unfold with growing horror. His children were falling apart. His ex-wife was drowning, and his guests were treating it like entertainment. The businessman in him recognized a PR disaster in the making, but something deeper, something he'd buried for 3 years, finally stirred to life. "That's enough," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the chaos with surprising authority. The crowd hesitated, reluctant to leave such prime gossip material. "I set out." David's voice boomed across the terrace. "Party's over. Maya will validate your parking." His assistant appeared as if from nowhere, efficiently beginning to herd confused guests toward the elevator. The mayor started to protest, but one look at David's face made him reconsider. "But David," Keandra whispered, "what about—" "Not now." His tone was final in a way she'd never heard before. As the terrace emptied, David found himself facing his family in the sudden quiet. The city lights twinkled below, but the only sounds were Carlos's diminishing sobs and the soft rustle of Isabella trying to manage 4 overwhelmed children. "Miguel," David said carefully, approaching his son who was still mesmerized by the champagne glasses. "Those are grown-up glasses. Would you like to see something cooler?" Miguel looked up at him with cautious interest. David led him to the terrace railing, pointing down at the city lights. "See all those lights? Each one is someone's home. Can you count how many you can see?" It was a simple distraction, but it worked. Miguel pressed his face against the glass, beginning to count in his careful, precise way that reminded David painfully of himself at that age. 1, 2, 3. Meanwhile, Isabella had managed to calm Carlos enough that his crying reduced to hiccuping sniffles. Sophia still clung to her leg, but the immediate crisis seemed to be passing. "They're not used to crowds," Isabella said quietly, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Or staying up this late. I should take them back to the hotel." "No." The word came out more forcefully than David intended. "I mean, it's late. Traffic will be horrible, and they're already upset." Isabella studied his face, searching for his real motivation. "What are you suggesting?" "Stay, tonight. There are guest rooms. The kids can sleep, and we can talk when they're not so overwhelmed." It wasn't really a request, and they both knew it. The evening had spiraled too far out of control for Isabella to simply disappear again. The children were exhausted, the media attention would be brutal, and despite everything, David had just publicly acknowledged them as his children. "I don't think that's a good idea," Isabella said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Mommy, I'm tired," Maria said, finally releasing David's leg but staying close to him. "Can we sleep here? It's pretty." "Please," David said. And the word came out more vulnerable than he intended. "I dismissed everyone. It's just us now. Let me at least make sure they're comfortable." Isabella looked at her children, tired, confused, and for the first time in their lives, in the presence of their father. She looked at David, who was making an effort, however clumsy, to connect with them. "One night," she said finally. "But in the morning, we really talk about everything." David nodded, relief flooding through him. "Yes." As if sensing the shift in adult energy, the children began to settle. Miguel continued counting lights with David's gentle encouragement. Sophia ventured a few steps away from Isabella's legs to examine a flower arrangement. Carlos's breathing had returned to normal, though he remained firmly planted in his mother's arms. "There's a master suite with a sitting area," David said carefully. "The kids could sleep in the main room, and you could use the sitting area. Or there are separate guest rooms if you prefer." "Together," Isabella said immediately. "They don't do well separated, especially in strange places." The word "togethers" hung between them, loaded with meaning neither was ready to examine too closely. "Of course," David said. "I'll have Maya bring up some things from the kitchen. Are they hungry?" "Always," Isabella said, the ghost of a smile crossing her face. "But nothing too fancy. They're not used to." She gestured vaguely at the opulent surroundings. "I remember what you used to make," David said softly. "Mac and cheese, grilled cheese and tomato soup. Simple things." Isabella's eyes widened slightly. She'd assumed he'd forgotten everything about their life together, but apparently he remembered some things. "I'll see what I can do," he said, then paused. "Isabella, about what I said earlier. About manipulation. I was scared," she finished. "I know, but David, they're not weapons. They're just children who want to know their father." David looked at Miguel, still counting lights with intense concentration. At Maria, who was now trying to rearrange the flowers to her liking. At Sophia, who had discovered that her voice echoed nicely off the glass walls. at Carlos, who was watching everything with David's own quiet intensity. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted, the words barely audible. "Neither did I," Isabella replied. "But you learn, you just love them, and you learn." David just admitted he doesn't know how to be a father. Do you think Isabella should help him learn, or is it too late for him to earn that chance? What would you do in her position? Let us know in the comments. For the first time in 3 years, David Chen and Isabella Rodriguez Chen stood in the same space, not as adversaries, but as parents trying to figure out what came next. Outside, the city hummed with life, but inside the penthouse, 4 children who had never known their father were about to spend their first night in his home, while 2 people who had once loved each other completely tried to navigate the wreckage of their shared past and the uncertain promise of their future. 2 hours later, the children were finally asleep. David stood in the doorway of the master suite, watching 4 small bodies arranged across the king-sized bed like fallen stars. Isabella had built a fortress of pillows around them, ensuring none would roll off in the night. She moved through the room with quiet efficiency, dimming lights, adjusting blankets, pressing gentle kisses to sleeping foreheads. "They're beautiful," he whispered. Isabella paused at Carlos's bedside, her hand resting on his back. "They're good kids, even when things were hard." David wanted to ask about those hard times, but something in her posture warned him off. Instead, he retreated to the sitting area, where room service had left a tray of coffee and the simple food he'd requested. Isabella joined him a few minutes later, closing the bedroom door softly behind her. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the evening settling around them. Isabella cradled her coffee cup like a lifeline, while David stared out at the city lights that Miguel had counted so carefully. "I tried to call you," Isabella said suddenly, her voice barely audible. "That night, after I found out about the pregnancy." David's head snapped up. "What?" "The ultrasound appointment was on a Thursday. Dr. Martinez told me about the quadruplets, and I was so scared, but also excited. I thought maybe it was a sign, that maybe having babies would fix what was broken between us." She took a shaky breath, lost in the memory. "I came home early to surprise you. I had the ultrasound pictures in my purse, and I'd bought this little onesie that said Daddy's Little Miracle, but then I realized it was babies, plural, so I bought 3 more, and I was going to arrange them on the bed." David's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as he set it down. "But you weren't home. Your phone went straight to voicemail. So I waited. I made your favorite dinner, that shrimp scampi you used to love, and I kept calling, hour after hour." The words were coming faster now, 3 years of buried pain spilling out like a broken dam. "Finally, at midnight, you came home, and you had," she paused, her voice breaking slightly. "You had her perfume on your shirt, her lipstick on your collar. You couldn't even look at me." David's hands were shaking now. He remembered that night, one of many he'd been trying to forget. He'd been with Keandra at her apartment, and Isabella had been waiting up for him. She'd been wearing that blue nightgown he'd bought her for their anniversary, and she'd looked so hopeful, so excited about something. "You said you had something to tell me," he said slowly, the memory surfacing like a physical pain. "I did." Isabella's laugh was bitter. "I said, 'David, I have news,' and you said, 'I said I had news too.'" David closed his eyes, the full horror of that night crashing over him. "Oh God, Isabella. I told you about Keandra first. You told me you were in love with someone else, that you'd been lying to me for months, that you wanted a divorce because you'd finally found someone who made you feel alive." Isabella set down her coffee cup with deliberate care, her hands trembling. "And then you asked what my news was. Like it was just casual conversation. Like you hadn't just destroyed our marriage." David's throat felt raw. "What did you say?" Nothing. I said nothing. I just stood there with those ultrasound pictures in my hand, listening to you talk about how young and beautiful and free Keandra was. How she understood you in ways I never could. How being with her reminded you of who you really were. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. And I realized that if you wanted to be free that badly, if you found our marriage so suffocating, then having 4 babies would be the last thing you'd want to hear. So you let me leave, without knowing. I let you leave because you wanted to leave. The words exploded out of her. You think I should have trapped you with a pregnancy announcement? Made you stay out of guilt? David was quiet for a long moment. I would have stayed. Out of obligation, not love. And what kind of father would that have made you? What kind of life would that have been for them? Isabella turned back to face him, and David saw the exhaustion in her eyes, not just from tonight, but from 3 years of carrying this burden alone. I wanted them to have a father who chose them, not one who resented them for ruining his chance at happiness. But you were pregnant, alone. How did you manage? Isabella's smile was sharp. I moved in with my sister. Worked 2 jobs until I couldn't anymore. Applied for every assistance program I could find. Carmen helped with childcare, so I could work nights at the hospital and mornings at the daycare. David's mind was reeling. While he'd been living in luxury with Keandra, Isabella had been scraping by, raising 4 children in a cramped apartment, working herself to exhaustion. Why didn't you ask for help? From me? From anyone? Pride? Maybe. Or fear. I kept thinking you'd figure it out, that you'd do the math, and realize, she shrugged. But you never called, never asked how I was doing. Your lawyer made it clear you wanted no contact for a clean break. David buried his face in his hands. I thought it would be easier for both of us. Easier. Isabella repeated the word like it tasted bitter. Do you know what Maria's first word was? David looked up at her, afraid to hear the answer. Data, she said. Data for months, looking toward the door every time someone came home. I couldn't bring myself to tell her you weren't coming back. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of 3 years of missed moments, of children who had grown up without their father, of a woman who had carried an impossible burden with quiet dignity. I'm sorry, David whispered, but the words felt inadequate, pathetic. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty, Isabella said, though her voice suggested otherwise. I'm telling you this so you understand. Those children in there, they're not your second chance, David. They're your only chance. And if you walk away again, if you decide this is too complicated, or too messy, or too real, then you're dead to them. Forever. Isabella just revealed the devastating truth about that night David left. Do you think she was right to protect him from the burden of knowing about the pregnancy, or should she have fought harder to make him stay? What would you have done in her position? Share your thoughts below. David stared at the bedroom door, behind which 4 children slept peacefully, unaware that their father was finally learning the true cost of his choices. For the first time in 3 years, David Chen understood that some mistakes couldn't be undone with money or charm or good intentions. Some mistakes required something far more terrifying, the courage to become a different person entirely. Dawn crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, painting the city in soft pastels. David hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in the sitting area, alternating between staring at the bedroom door and replaying every moment of the past 3 years through this new, devastating lens. Isabella had dozed fitfully in the chair across from him, jerking awake periodically to check on the children. Even in sleep, she remained hyper-vigilant, a mother's instincts honed by years of solo parenting. The first sound from the bedroom was Maria's voice, bright and curious. "Mommy, where are we?" Isabella stirred, immediately alert. "I'm right here, Misha." David stood uncertainly as Isabella slipped into the bedroom. Through the cracked door, he could hear gentle murmurs, the rustle of blankets, and then Miguel's voice, "Is this where our daddy lives?" "Yes, baby. This is where he lives." "It's really big." Sophia's voice chimed in. "Odd." "Can we see him?" Carlos asked. His words still slightly slurred with sleep. David's heart clenched. He moved closer to the door, not wanting to intrude but desperate to hear more. "He's right outside," Isabella said softly. "But let's get you cleaned up first, okay?" 20 minutes later, 4 freshly washed children emerged from the bedroom, their hair combed and their clothes smoothed. They looked around the spacious sitting area with wide eyes, taking in the expensive furniture and the view of the city below. "Good morning," David said carefully, uncertain of his role in this domestic scene. "Good morning, Daddy," Maria said, with the easy confidence of a child who had decided to trust him. The word daddy hit him like a physical blow, sweet and terrifying and completely undeserved. "Are you hungry?" he asked, the question feeling both normal and surreal. "Always," Isabella said, and there was the ghost of a smile in her voice. "Fair warning. They eat constantly, growth spurts." David had already anticipated this. He'd called his housekeeper at dawn, asking her to stock the kitchen with child-friendly foods. As they made their way to the kitchen, he found himself hyper-aware of every detail, the way Carlos held Isabella's hand, how Miguel counted the steps as they walked, how Sophia hummed softly under her breath. "Whoa!" Maria breathed as they entered the kitchen. "It's like a restaurant." "Kind of," David agreed, then hesitated. "Would you like me to make you something?" Isabella raised an eyebrow. "You cook now?" "I learned after," he gestured vaguely, not wanting to say after you left in front of the children. "What can you make?" Miguel asked with scientific curiosity. "Pancakes," David said, then added hopefully, "Mickey Mouse-shaped." 4 small faces lit up with delight. Isabella looked surprised. The David she'd known had barely been able to operate the coffee maker. "I'll help," she offered, and David felt an unexpected surge of gratitude. Working together in the kitchen felt like stepping back in time. Isabella knew exactly where everything was, despite not having lived here for 3 years. She moved with the same efficient grace he remembered, anticipating his needs before he voiced them. "Butter's in the," he started. "Door compartment, left side," she finished, already reaching for it. The children had arranged themselves at the breakfast bar, chattering excitedly about their surroundings. David found himself listening to their conversation with fascination. "Look, there's a button for everything." Sophia marveled at the high-tech coffee machine. "That's because rich people are lazy," Miguel said matter-of-factly. Isabella choked on her coffee. "Miguel." "What?" "That's what Tia Carmen says." David laughed. Actually laughed for the first time in longer than he could remember. Your Tia Carmen might have a point. As the pancakes took shape, David discovered that Mickey Mouse ears were harder to execute than he'd anticipated. His first attempts looked more like abstract art than beloved cartoon characters. "Daddy, that one looks like a monster," Maria giggled. "A friendly monster," David corrected, flipping the misshapen pancake. "Can I try?" Carlos asked, climbing onto a stool beside him. David hesitated. Hot griddle, small child, potential disaster. But Isabella nodded encouragingly, and something inside him loosened. "Okay, but we have to be very careful," he said, guiding Carlos's small hands to hold the spatula. "The pan is hot, so we don't touch it." Carlos nodded solemnly, taking his responsibility seriously. Together, they managed to create something that vaguely resembled Mickey Mouse, if Mickey Mouse had been drawn by someone with serious coordination issues. "It's perfect," Carlos declared, beaming up at David with pure joy. The simple praise hit David harder than any business success ever had. This was his son, proud of a lopsided pancake they'd made together. The moment felt precious beyond measure. "You're really good with them," Isabella said quietly, moving beside him at the stove. "I'm terrified," David admitted, his voice low enough that the children couldn't hear. "I keep waiting to do something wrong, to prove I'm not cut out for this." "You think I wasn't terrified?" Isabella's voice was gentle. "I'd never changed a diaper before they were born. I learned everything from YouTube videos and trial and error. But you make it look so easy." 3 years of practice. And a lot of mistakes. She paused, watching him carefully portion syrup onto Maria's plate. "You're more natural at this than you think." After breakfast, the children explored the penthouse with the enthusiasm of small explorers discovering a new continent. David found himself following them around, answering questions, and marveling at how they saw the world. "Why do you have so many books if you live alone?" Sophia asked, standing in his home office. "Because I like to read," David said, then had an idea. "Do you like stories?" "Mommy reads to us every night," Miguel said. "Would you like me to read to you?" The children exchanged glances, then nodded eagerly. David pulled out a tablet, scrolling through children's books he'd downloaded impulsively at dawn. "How about this one?" he asked, showing them a story about a family of bears. They settled around him on the couch, and David began to read. It felt strange but wonderful, the weight of small bodies leaning against him, the way they gasped at exciting parts, how they asked questions about the pictures. Isabella watched from the doorway, her expression unreadable. When the story ended, she spoke softly. "They've never had anyone read to them except me." "I'd like to do it more," David said, the words surprising him with their honesty. "They'd like that." Later, while the children napped on the couch, David and Isabella sat together in companionable silence. The morning had been unexpectedly peaceful, filled with small moments of connection that felt both foreign and familiar. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up," David said, "that this is all some elaborate dream." "I know the feeling," Isabella replied. "For 3 years I'd imagine what it would be like if you met them. How you'd react, what you'd say. I never imagined this." "What did you imagine?" Isabella was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, I imagined you'd pay support, and maybe see them on weekends. I never thought you'd want to be a real father." "I want to be," David said, the words feeling like a vow. "I want to be everything they need. I just don't know how." "You start by showing up," Isabella said simply. "Every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." David looked at his sleeping children, their faces peaceful and trusting. Carlos had his thumb in his mouth, while Maria clutched a small stuffed animal Isabella had produced from her purse. Sophia and Miguel were curled together like puppies. "I missed so much," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "But you're here now," Isabella said. "That's what matters." David is finally beginning to bond with his children, but 3 years is a lot of lost time. Do you think it's possible for him to truly become the father they need? What would it take for you to forgive someone who missed the first 3 years of your child's life? Share your thoughts in the comments. For the first time since the night he'd left, David and Isabella sat together in peace, watching their children sleep, and it felt like maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to being a family. The feeling was fragile, tenuous, built on hope and good intentions. But for this moment, in the quiet of the morning, it felt like enough. Neither of them noticed Keandra's keycard lying forgotten on the entry table or heard the soft ding of the elevator arriving at the penthouse floor. The soft ding of the elevator barely registered over the peaceful sounds of the afternoon. David was on the floor with Miguel, helping him build a tower out of books, while Isabella folded the small clothes they'd washed that morning. The children had been playing quietly for the past hour, their earlier excitement settling into comfortable contentment. "Daddy, it's gonna fall," Sophia warned, watching the precarious tower with concern. "Sometimes things fall," David said gently. "But we can always build them again." The words felt profound in a way that surprised him. He was learning that parenting was full of these small moments of unexpected wisdom. "David?" The voice cut through the domestic tranquility like a blade. David's blood turned to ice as he looked up to see Keandra standing in the doorway, her perfect features twisted with confusion and hurt. She was still wearing her dress from the night before, but now it was wrinkled, her makeup smudged. She looked like someone who had spent the night driving around the city, trying to process what she'd witnessed. "Keandra!" David scrambled to his feet, his voice hoarse. "I didn't expect. You didn't expect me to use my key?" Her Jamaican accent was sharp with pain. "To come home to my own apartment?" The words hung in the air like accusations. Isabella had gone completely still, her hands frozen on Carlos's tiny shirt. The children sensed the shift in adult energy immediately. Their chatter died away, replaced by the tense silence of small people who knew something was wrong. "This isn't your home," Isabella said quietly, her voice steady but her knuckles white where she gripped the laundry. "Isn't it?" Keandra's laugh was bitter. "I've been living here for 2 years. My clothes are in that closet. My jewelry is in that drawer. I was at that party as his partner. As his." "As his what?" Isabella stood slowly, her full height impressive despite being several inches shorter than the model. "His girlfriend? His companion? What exactly did you think you were to him?" David stepped between them, his hands raised in a peacemaking gesture. "Both of you, please." "The children." "The children," Keandra repeated, her voice breaking slightly. "Yes, let's talk about the children. The 4 children you never mentioned in 2 years of being together." "I didn't know," David said desperately. "I swear, Keandra, I had no idea." "But you knew there was a possibility." Her voice rose, causing Maria to press closer to Isabella's legs. "You were married, David. You had a wife. Did you think babies were impossible?" The accusation hit like a physical blow. David realized with dawning horror that Keandra was right. He'd been careless, reckless, assuming that Isabella would have told him if something had happened. "I trusted you," Keandra continued, her voice cracking. "I turned down magazine covers, modeling contracts, opportunities in Paris and Milan because you said we had a future. Because you said you loved me." "I do love you," David said, but the words sounded hollow even to himself. Isabella made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. "Do you hear yourself, David? You're telling another woman you love her while your children are standing right here." "Mommy, why is everyone being loud again?" Carlos whispered, his thumb finding its way to his mouth. The simple question shattered something in David's chest. His son was scared, confused, watching his father fail spectacularly at managing the most basic situation. "Because your daddy can't decide what he wants," Isabella said, her voice deadly quiet, just like before. "That's not fair," David protested. "Fair?" Isabella's composure finally cracked completely. "You want to talk about fair? I'll tell you what's fair. Fair is spending 9 months pregnant with quadruplets, alone, while you're posting vacation photos with her on Instagram. Fair is going to every doctor's appointment by myself, holding my own hand during ultrasounds." "Isabella." "I'm not finished." Her voice was sharp as broken glass. "Fair is teaching 4 children to say daddy to a photograph because their actual father couldn't be bothered to ask if his ex-wife was okay after their divorce." Keandra stared at Isabella with something like shock, then turned to David. "You never asked about her? Not once?" David's silence was answer enough. "Oh my God," Keandra breathed. "You really are as selfish as they say." "Who says that?" David demanded, his temper finally fraying. "Everyone. The tabloids, the society pages, your business partners' wives. They all say the same thing, that David Chen is brilliant in boardrooms, but toxic in bedrooms. That you use people and throw them away when something better comes along." "That's not true," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?" Keandra's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I defended you. I told everyone they were wrong, that you were just misunderstood. But looking at this," she gestured at Isabella and the children. "Looking at how you discarded your own family, I realize I was just another acquisition, wasn't I?" The children were fully crying now, not the dramatic tantrums of overtired toddlers, but the quiet, heartbroken sobs of children who recognized that their brief moment of happiness was crumbling. "I want to go home," Sophia whispered. "I know, baby," Isabella said, already moving to gather their things. "We're going home." "No," David said desperately. "Isabella, please, don't leave. Not like this." "Like what, David? Like you left me? Without explanation, without goodbye, without looking back?" Her words were surgical in their precision, cutting straight to the heart of his deepest shame. "I was young," he said weakly. "I made mistakes." "You were 37 years old," Isabella shot back. "And you're making the same mistakes right now. You're standing in this room with your children, with the woman who raised them alone, and you're telling your girlfriend that you love her." Keandra was backing toward the door, her face pale. "I can't do this. I can't be part of this chaos." "Keandra, wait." "No." She held up a hand, stopping him. "Choose, David, right now, choose." The ultimatum hung in the air like a death sentence. David looked at Keandra. Beautiful, uncomplicated, representing the life he'd built after his marriage ended. Then he looked at Isabella and the children, messy, complicated, representing responsibility and sacrifice and everything he'd run from. David started, then stopped. "I need time to think." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples that would never stop spreading. Isabella's face went completely blank. "Time to think," she repeated flatly. "Mama, Daddy said he needs to think," Maria said, confusion evident in her small voice. "About whether he wants to be your daddy?" Isabella said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Come on, babies. We're going home." "But I don't want to leave Daddy," Carlos cried. "I know, mi amor. But Daddy needs to think about whether he wants us to stay." As Isabella gathered the children, David stood frozen, paralyzed by the magnitude of the choice before him. Everything he'd built with Keandra, their life together, their plans, their future, hung in the balance. But so did his relationship with 4 children, who had never asked to be born, who had never asked to be abandoned. "Isabella, please," he said, his voice breaking. "This isn't how I wanted." "How you wanted what?" she asked, turning back to face him. "How you wanted to manage this situation? How you wanted to fit us into your life without disrupting your real relationship?" The accuracy of her words hit him like a slap. "We're not a problem to be managed, David. We're not a complication to be solved when it's convenient. We're people who needed you, who waited for you, who hoped you might choose us." She paused at the door. The children clustered around her like a shield. "But you can't choose us if you don't know what you want. And clearly you don't." David had to choose between his girlfriend and his family, but he froze. Was Isabella right to leave when he couldn't decide immediately, or should she have given him more time to process this impossible situation? What would you have done in David's position? Tell us in the comments. The elevator doors closed on Isabella's determined face, and 4 small tear-streaked faces pressed against the glass. David stood in his empty penthouse, surrounded by the detritus of a morning that had felt like the beginning of something beautiful and had ended in complete destruction. Kendra was gone. Isabella was gone. The children were gone. And David Chen, millionaire businessman, was alone with the choice that would define the rest of his life. The penthouse felt like a mausoleum. David stood in the center of his living room, surrounded by the remnants of the morning that had promised everything and delivered devastation. A forgotten stuffed animal lay on the couch. Maria's bear that Isabella had pulled from her purse. The breakfast dishes still sat in the sink, tiny plates with Mickey Mouse pancake crumbs that would never be cleared by small hands again. The silence was deafening. He picked up Maria's bear, its soft fur still carrying the faint scent of baby shampoo and innocence. 3 hours ago, his daughter had been curled against his chest, listening to him read about a family of bears who loved each other unconditionally. Now she was gone, crying in the back of a taxi, wondering why Daddy needed to think about whether he wanted to be her father. David sank into his chair, the weight of his choices crushing down on him like a physical force. His phone buzzed incessantly, missed calls from Kendra, from his assistant, from business partners who had undoubtedly heard about last night's spectacle. He ignored them all. The city sprawled below him, 8 million people living their lives, making their choices, loving their families. From his penthouse window, he could see children playing in the park across the street, their laughter carried on the wind. Normal children, with normal fathers who didn't need to think about whether they wanted to be parents. What kind of man needs to think about loving his own children? The question echoed in his mind, and he realized he already knew the answer. A selfish man. A coward. A man who had spent so long running from responsibility that he'd forgotten what it felt like to choose something difficult because it was right. His phone rang. Kendra's name flashed on the screen. David. Her voice was small, broken. I'm at the airport. What? I'm going back to Kingston. To my family. I can't do this anymore. David closed his eyes. Kendra, please. Let's talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. Her voice was steadier now, resolved. I've been thinking about what I said earlier, about you being selfish. I was wrong. You were. You're not selfish, David. You're broken. And I've been trying to fix you for 2 years, thinking that if I loved you enough, if I was perfect enough, you'd choose me over your past. The words cut deeper than any accusation of selfishness could have. But those children, they're not your past, are they? They're your future, your real future. And I've been standing in the way of that. That's not true. It is true. Her voice was gentle now, sad but certain. I watched you with them this morning, David. I saw how you looked at them, how you lit up when that little boy called you Daddy. I've never seen you look at me that way. David's throat felt raw. I do love you. I know you do, but you love them more. You love them in a way that changes everything, in a way that makes everything else seem small and temporary. She paused. The way you used to love her. Isabella and I are over. Are you? Because from where I was standing, it looked like you were remembering who you used to be when you were with her. The man you were before you decided that success was more important than love. David found himself thinking about the morning, how natural it had felt to work beside Isabella in the kitchen. How right it had felt to have the children around him, filling the empty spaces in his life with their laughter and questions and unconditional trust. I'm scared, he admitted, the words barely audible. I know, but being scared doesn't mean you get to run away, not from them. They need you to be brave. After Kendra hung up, David sat in the growing darkness, her words echoing in his mind. Outside, the city lights began to twinkle, each one representing someone's home, someone's family, someone's choice to love despite the risk. He thought about Isabella, alone in a hotel room with 4 exhausted children, probably fielding their questions about why Daddy didn't want them. He thought about Maria's small arms around his leg, about Miguel's careful counting, about Sophia's humming, about Carlos's thumb in his mouth as he fell asleep against David's chest. His children, his family, the people who had never asked him for anything except to be their father. David pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found a number he hadn't called in 3 years. Isabella's sister, Carmen. Carmen? It's David. Yes, I know I have a lot of nerve calling. Listen, I need to know where they are. Why? So you can hurt them again? So I can choose them. Finally. Completely. The way I should have 3 years ago. Carmen was quiet for a long moment. The Marriott downtown, room 1247. But David? Yeah? If you're not sure, if there's even a part of you that's going to walk away again, don't go. Those kids have been through enough. I'm sure, David said, and for the first time in 3 years, he meant it completely. He hung up and looked around his penthouse one last time. The expensive furniture, the art collection, the symbols of success that had felt so important just hours ago, all of it felt hollow now, meaningless without people to share it with. David grabbed his keys and headed for the door, but stopped at the entry table. Keandra's key card lay there forgotten in the chaos of the morning. He picked it up, holding it for a moment, then set it down permanently. Some choices, once made, changed everything. The elevator ride to the garage felt like the longest of his life. As the doors opened, David Chen, billionaire, bachelor, man who had spent 3 years running from the best thing that ever happened to him, stepped out and began the journey back to his family. The drive across town was a blur of traffic lights and mounting determination. With each mile, David felt the weight of his old life falling away, replaced by something he'd forgotten existed: hope. He thought about what he would say to Isabella, how he would explain 3 years of cowardice and selfishness. He thought about his children, about the years of bedtime stories and scraped knees and parent-teacher conferences he'd missed. But mostly, he thought about the moment when Maria had wrapped her arms around his leg and called him Daddy with such complete trust, such absolute faith that he would love her back. David has finally made his choice, but is it too late? Isabella has been hurt so many times. Do you think she'll give him another chance? What would it take for you to forgive someone who repeatedly chose someone else over you and your children? Share your thoughts as we head into the final act. As he pulled into the Marriott's circular drive, David realized he was no longer thinking about what he had to lose. For the first time in 3 years, he was thinking about what he had to gain. Everything. Room 1247 was on the 12th floor, but David took the stairs. He needed the time to think, to prepare, to figure out how to convince the woman he'd abandoned that he was finally ready to be the man she and their children deserved. By the time he reached the 12th floor, his heart was pounding from more than physical exertion. David stood outside the door for a long moment, listening to the muffled sounds from within. Someone was crying, not the dramatic wails of an upset child, but the quiet, heartbroken sobs of someone trying to be strong for others. His chest tightened as he realized it was Isabella. He knocked softly. The crying stopped immediately. Footsteps approached the door and David could almost feel Isabella checking the peephole. "Go away, David." "Isabella, please. I need to talk to you." "You had your chance to talk. You chose to think instead." Through the door he could hear Carlos asking, "Mommy, is that Daddy?" "Yes, baby, but can he come in? I want to show him my toy car." David's heart clenched. Even after everything, his son still wanted to share something with him. "Please," David said, his voice cracking. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." "The children are sleeping," Isabella said. but her voice was softer now. "Then come out here, please." The silence stretched so long that David began to think she wouldn't respond. Then the door opened and Isabella stepped into the hallway, closing it gently behind her. She'd changed into jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Without makeup, with tear stains on her cheeks, she looked exactly like the woman he'd fallen in love with 8 years ago. Beautiful, not because she was perfect, but because she was real. "You have 5 minutes," she said, crossing her arms protectively across her chest. Kendra left. "Congratulations, I'm sure you'll find another model soon enough." The bitterness in her voice was well-earned, but it still cut deep. "I didn't ask her to leave. She left because she realized something I was too stupid to see." David leaned against the opposite wall, maintaining distance but holding her gaze. "She realized that I never loved her the way I loved you, the way I still love you." Isabella's composure wavered slightly. Don't what? Don't tell you the truth? Don't admit that leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life? Don't make this about us, David. This isn't about us anymore. This is about 4 children who need stability, who need someone they can count on. Someone who won't disappear when things get complicated. "You're right," David said, and his immediate agreement seemed to surprise her. "This is about them. It's about Maria, who counts everything just like I do. About Miguel, who has my stubborn streak and your kind heart. About Sophia, who hums when she's thinking, just like I used to do. About Carlos, who looks at the world with wonder and trust, even after everything." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "David, I know their names, Isabella. I know their personalities. I know that Maria likes her sandwiches cut diagonally and that Carlos won't sleep without his thumb. I know that Miguel is afraid of loud noises and that Sophia loves to draw princesses." "You learned all that in one morning," Isabella whispered. "I learned it because I was paying attention. Because for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't thinking about what I was missing or what I wanted to be somewhere else. I was present. I was their father." David took a small step closer. "I can't undo the past 3 years. I can't give you back the nights you spent alone, the mornings you handled 4 crying babies by yourself, the moments when you needed someone and I wasn't there." Isabella wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, but the tears kept coming. "But I can promise you this," David continued, his voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I will never make you doubt my commitment to them again. I will never make them wonder if their father loves them. I will never—" The door behind Isabella opened, and Maria's small face peered out. "Mommy, why are you crying?" Isabella immediately knelt down. "I'm okay, baby. Mommy's just talking to Daddy." "Is Daddy staying this time?" Maria asked with the devastating directness of a child. David knelt down too, bringing himself to Maria's eye level. "If your mommy says it's okay, I'd like to stay forever. Would you like that?" Maria nodded solemnly. "Will you read us another story?" "Every night, if you want me to." "What about when we're at home?" The question hung in the air, loaded with implications. David looked up at Isabella, then back at his daughter. "Well, maybe Daddy could come home with you, if Mommy agrees." Maria turned to Isabella with hopeful eyes. "Can he, Mommy? Please?" Isabella was crying openly now, all pretense of composure abandoned. "Baby, it's complicated." "But do you want him to?" Maria pressed with the persistence that Isabella had told David was exactly like his own. Isabella met David's eyes over their daughter's head. In that look, David saw 3 years of pain, of hope deferred, of love that had never quite died despite everything he'd done to kill it. "Yes," Isabella whispered, "I want him to." The hallway erupted as the other 3 children tumbled out of the room, having obviously been listening at the door. They surrounded David like a small army, chattering excitedly about going home and stories and whether Daddy would live with them now. "Does this mean we're a family?" Carlos asked, wrapping his arms around David's neck. David looked at Isabella over their children's heads. She was smiling through her tears, and for the first time in 3 years, she looked at him with something other than guarded caution. "Yes," David said, his voice thick with emotion, "we're a family." As they gathered the children's few belongings, Isabella paused at the window overlooking the city. "It won't be easy," she said quietly. "There's a lot to work through. A lot of trust to rebuild." "I know," David replied, watching Miguel carefully pack his toy cars. "But I'm not going anywhere. Not ever again." Isabella nodded, then surprised him by reaching for his hand. "Then let's go home." After 3 years apart, David and Isabella are finally going home together as a family. Do you believe in second chances like this? Have you ever had to choose between the comfortable life you built and the family you left behind? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones about finding your way back home. 20 minutes later, they walked out of the Marriott together, David carrying Carlos, Isabella holding Sophia's hand, while Maria and Miguel raced ahead toward the car. It was the mirror image of Isabella's arrival at his birthday party, but this time they were all moving in the same direction. Toward home, toward family, toward the love that had been waiting patiently for David Chen to finally choose it. As they loaded the children into David's car, Maria looked up at him with serious eyes. "Daddy, are you happy now?" David looked at his daughter, then at Isabella settling Carlos into his car seat, then at Miguel and Sophia arguing good-naturedly about who got to sit by the window. "Yes, princess," he said, meaning it completely. "I'm the happiest man in the world." The drive back to Queens, to the small apartment that would soon become home to a man who had once thought happiness came from penthouses and possessions, was filled with children's laughter, Isabella's voice singing softly in Spanish, and David Chen finally understanding what it meant to be truly wealthy. Some love stories end with first kisses. Others end with second chances. David's ended with a choice to come home.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing than you can ever imagine, so do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.